Hey there, folks. Welcome to Spectrum Pulse. We talk about music, movies, art, and culture. And today we're going to be talking about the new album from Doug Paisley, titled Strong Feeling. So as the only country music critic on YouTube, I tend to get some flack because of my supposed lack of country credentials. Even though I've been listening to country for over 20 years, it's probably one of the genres of which I know the most. Most of such comments take the form of, oh, you're a city boy, you can't possibly understand the appeal, or with the frequent follow-up being, you're Canadian, you just don't get this kind of music if you're not an American, man. And then it's typically followed up by a bunch of homophobic slurs that I prefer not to indulge. But I feel that now is an appropriate time to address those oh so enlightened individuals. Speaking as a guy who grew up in Western Canada with country music, you know there's such a thing as Canadian country, right? I'm dead serious here. Outside of Nashville and some of the cities in Texas, the biggest nexus of country music in North America would probably be Edmonton, Alberta, Canada, which has developed its own burgeoning country music scene completely outside of the US. And it's a distinctive scene with its own flavor and personality, which managed to avoid some of the worst trends in country music that came out of the States last year. Acts like Gord Bamford and George Canyon and Dean Brody, they might not be all that familiar south the border, but thanks to the Canadian Radio and Telecommunications Commission, they've managed to build audiences out here. Better still is that they've tended to stick to a decidedly Canadian sensibility, which sticks much closer to the whole neo-traditional country scene in comparison with the flashier, more aggressively meat-headed style that exploded in the US last year. But today, we're not going to be talking about the Edmonton scene, but instead about an alternative country act that comes from Toronto. Yes, my current location, named Doug Paisley. His last major release was in 2010 called Constant Companion, and it was pretty damn good. A country act towing the line between indie folk and neo-traditional country, Doug Paisley stood out for his weary, emotive lyrics that had a very simple charm that drew you into his melancholy, which set him above the typical white douchebag with acoustic guitar. Now, like with Matt Berenger of The National, his country roots informed the songwriting, but what became most interesting was his instrumentation and delivery, both of which were very reminiscent of the late 70s, which, to be honest, wasn't a really great time for country music. It was very smooth, it was very polished, reflecting not so much downbeat depression, but tired resignation that things might go downhill, but he could handle it. And yet, even as harsh reality lurked behind the lyrics, there were a lot of rougher flourishes hiding in the instrumentation that I really liked instead. The organ, the piano-driven melodies, the gentle support of Feist, award-winning Canadian as a supporting vocalist, all of it really came together to create a really strong singer-songwriter record that really stuck with me. So I was interested in his newest album, Strong Feelings. How'd it go? Well, like Constant Companion, it's pretty damn good. I'd hesitate to call it great though, or an album that would really stick with me in the long term, but you know what? Strong Feelings is exactly the sort of record that I would expect from Doug Paisley. A stylistic evolution from his last album, but one that effectively hits the same beats in terms of presentation, tone, and in songwriting. There is some experimentation, but it operates off of the same sturdy foundation that made Paisley's work so emotionally effective in the past. So okay, let's start with the instrumentation, where there have been three major changes. The organ has been swapped out for a piano on more than a few tracks, the production has a decidedly rougher quality, and the guitar work is a little quicker. In comparison with the quieter, smoother singer-songwriter material that Doug Paisley previously brought to the table, this album is a little bit rougher around the edges, and since it preserves the beautiful instrumental texture and roughness, the sound is still gorgeously organic, and I really dug it. And while I will admit, just on a personal preference, that I was a little disappointed that the organ was swapped out more often than it wasn't, I did like the change and was impressed to find that Doug Paisley's material with a pulse actually sounds pretty damn good. That being said, there are a few production points that really should have been fixed. There's some fuzz on the mic on what's up is down that just should have been sanded out in post-production, and to me it was kind of distracting. I'll also say that while in the electric guitar moments, they're fine enough on this album, they do feel a little out of place when paired with the finger-picked acoustic melodies. Maybe the tone of the guitar is a little too sharp and twangy for the mix. Maybe there's just not enough rougher fuzz to mellow it out. But it just didn't quite click for me, which is really quite a shame, I must admit, because the guitar work on this record is the second big highlight. Like his American country counterpart, Doug Paisley, he's a great guitarist, and his knack for catchy guitar lines lends this album a lot of personality. And then we have Paisley himself, and he has improved as a performer. There's more texture in his voice, and he's still a potent emotional presence. I will say though that he's better in his lower register, and he doesn't quite indulge it enough on this album. There's a real richness there that I find really appealing, but also because his higher range just doesn't sound as natural and doesn't mesh as well with the instrumentation. Now, thankfully, Mary Margaret O'Hara from another Canadian singer-songwriter steps up to replace Feist on this record, and she and Paisley have a lot of musical chemistry, which I did like. But look, none of that would matter at all if the songwriting wasn't here, and thankfully it is. As much as I did like Constant Companion's emotive charm, it did have a certain clumsiness to it, and the weaker songs on that album just couldn't rise above that. Fortunately, that's mostly been rectified as the songwriting is a fair bit tighter and contains some really compelling tracks exploring how life moves on, how we need to learn how to deal with loss and endings. For me, the standouts were Song My Love Can Sing, which falls in the vein of the Zac Brown Band's Goodbye in Her Eyes, and Where the Light Takes You, mostly because both songs play to a maturity and a deeper sadness that Doug Paisley's quiet confidence was able to overtake. It's a tough emotional balance, but you know what? He nails it. And yet, looking past that emotional balance, I can't help but feel that the technical songwriting on this record could have been a little bit stronger. Now, don't get me wrong, Doug Paisley is a natural at writing simply worded and yet very nuanced and effective songs, but most of that nuance is carried on in his emotional delivery, not exactly in the songwriting. Now, this leads to two problems. First, it means that some of the lyrics can come across as pretty simplistic outside of the music, and they don't exactly reward deeper thought in the tradition of the great singer-songwriters of any genre, which can lead to some of the songs coming across as a bit bland. But you know what? That can mostly be overlooked. There's nothing wrong with a very simple song done right, except when viewed in context with Paisley's last album, there hasn't been a lot of evolution on a conceptual or a thematic level. Sure, the writing is sharper and the metaphors are better structured, the presentation is still good here, but Paisley is returning to a very similar well as his last album, and just for the same sort of stories. Now, he's doing it well, that can't be overstated, and it's ultimately just a nitpick, but I feel that Paisley could have had a little bit more ambition in the choice of his topics. On this album, he proved he had the instrumental and emotional range to tackle more subjects, and look, I'm just a bit disappointed he didn't go farther in that particular direction. But really, if my criticism of Doug Paisley is that I wish I could hear more of him, that's a pretty minor issue on a pretty damn good album all the same. And while I would not say that I was wowed or blown away by Strong Feelings, it's definitely worth a listen. It's not the most intellectual record, I'll realize this. It's an album rooted in comforting emotional appeal, but you know what? That doesn't mean that it's not damn good at it, and that does mean it makes for a really easy, accessible listen, even if it doesn't stick with me in the same way. So with that, it's a strong 7 out of 10, and a definite recommendation from me. And all the more ironclad evidence that country music has a home in Canada, I'll take our brand of it any day of the week. So yeah, thanks a lot for watching. If you'd like to like and subscribe, I'd be more than grateful. I'm sure I'm going to get some comments about some of the scratchiness in my voice. I've gotten coming off a bit of a cold. That's why I didn't record the past 2 days. Yeah, I'm going to be working on trying to catch up with reviews as quickly as I can, but give me a little bit of time here, folks. So yeah, if there's anything I might be able to do to improve my presentation, or if there's any other albums you'd like me to take a look at from this year, I'd be more than happy to take a listen. Until then, see you next time.